Good afternoon and good morning, everybody on the line. I'm Silvia Stefini. I'm the chair of the Climate Global Initiative for the Chapter Zero in Italy. And I'm here to introduce this discussion about the Say on Climate. I have a great group of panelists with me, so I hope you will enjoy the discussion. We will start with a presentation from Georgeson about the Say on Climate. Say on Climate is really an important issue that has been becoming more and more frequent in the past few years, actually the past couple of years. And more companies are engaging with shareholders using this particular format. So we wanted to understand better what's going on in Europe. We asked Georgeson to provide an overview, and then we will discuss with our panelists more details. So we have companies that have undergone through the process of Say on Climate. So we have Atlantia, we have Ferrovial, and we have Shell. And then we'll have a discussion with investor, with Vanguard, and with Sabrina, who will bring the board perspective and really the intelligence from different jurisdictions. So I'll give now the word to Georgeson. So Francesco, you may want to start, and then we'll go into the details. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Silvia, and thank you very much, Chapter Zero Italy, for inviting us in this event. We are proud to be part of this very interesting roundtable on Say on Climate proposal, together with investor, board members, and company representative. Before to start to share the presentation, I will ask to my colleague Albert to share the screen. I want just to give some key takeaways about Say on Climate. First of all, we can say that shareholder focus on climate change has grown significantly over the past few years. That's also the reason why in 2022, our study showed a relevant increase of number of Say on Climate proposal. 36 proposals in 2022 that show 112-point increase in comparison with the previous year. We can say that the key elements of a well-constructed Say on Climate proposal are alignment with the Paris Agreement, a commitment to annual review of emission target, and compliance with the Task Force on Climate-related Financial Disclosure. Our investor survey that we performed in between January and February 2022 show also that investors welcome emission reduction targets that are verified by Science Based Targets initiative. Having said that, I shared some statistics about the Say on Climate proposal in Europe plus UK in 2022. In terms of geographical distribution, we can say that around 80% of Say on Climate proposal were in UK and France. More in detail, 44% UK and 36% in Spain. And in Ireland, Italy, and Norway was the first time where a Say on Climate proposal was submitted to the vote. Regarding the sector distribution, sectors that are forward the most Say on Climate resolution was financial and utilities with 7 proposals each. And the sector that saw the greatest increase is the real estate industry. If we speak about the level of support, normally this resolution are very welcome by investors. On average, the results is 90.7%. In terms of highest average support for the resolution, the first is the industrial service with 95.6%, then utilities with 92.7%, and final real estate with 91.5%. The sector with the lowest level of support on average is the retail, and then oil and gas and materials. Finally, I share some information regarding the proxy advisor recommendation. As you can see in the screen, that's the first year where ISS recommend against two Say on Climate proposal. Regarding Glass Lewis, we can say that partially the proxy advisor changed approach because in 2021, Glass Lewis recommend against in 47% of the case, or abstain. In 2022, we decrease significantly from 47% to 1/3. Now I ask to Alberto to go in detail on information about investor expectation and proxy advisor.
Thanks, Francesco, thanks, Silvia, and thanks to the CGI for inviting us again. As per our presentation, my presentation, I would stay didascalic because we still have in the panel valuable representative of both corporate issuers and investors. So I will stick to the paper, so to the guidelines provided by investors and proxy advisors and companies without commenting too much, leaving the deepening to the speakers we invited. So what should companies care when they look to say on climate proposal? First thing, we have to distinguish between say on climate proposal coming from the management and coming from shareholders, because this is a big question for the market. And generally speaking, before going through the presentation, generally speaking, when we look at a management proposal, we are asking companies to provide a detailed, the level of detail that we will see in a moment, a detailed presentation of what they are actually and currently doing and to which scope, to which target they are doing so far. On the opposite, when we look at a shareholder proposal, the market asks itself if the company needs such a stimulus from the shareholder, because when a shareholder asks to a burdensome compliance, a burdensome disclosure from the companies, well, it has to be necessary. It has to be required by the company's current behavior. So if a shareholder proposal is proposed, well, we should see to the story of the company and if such activism is needed. Focusing on the companies, the same climate proposal, as long as we saw during these last 2 years, looks at the annual disclosure of greenhouse gas emission, the strategic plan the companies is proposing to tackle the climate change issue. So a climate transition plan, a climate action plan, they are always called this way. And they are generally submitting this proposal for an advisory approval to the AGM. Such advisory approval is the most philosophical issue we are facing. Some proxy advisors say it loudly, and investors too. Vanguard and Andrew Burke will confirm. See that. The shareholder, the say on climate is a typical board issue and board responsibility, while others, such as ISS, looks at the seriousness of the proposal instead of questioning about the philosophical issue, who is responsible for. When investors are evaluating a say on climate proposal, they look at the seriousness. So is the data complete and consistent and credible with the transitioning to net zero emission business model? Are such targets compliant with the Paris Agreement? Are disclosure and proposals aligned with the most recognized framework, the TCFD? Is one of the most recognized, the Climate Action Initiative, the science-based targets are also the way to secure the disclosure. So they are third-party guarantor of the seriousness of the proposal. This way, we can move to the proxy advisor guidelines on say on climate. I anticipated that ISS is more neutral about the opportunity to move on a say on climate. And their guidelines reflect this approach. ISS hints are questioning companies about the completeness and seriousness of the disclosure. How they are doing this? They are doing this by assessing if the data are complete, are consistent with the climate transition plan, if the scopes covered by the assessment refers to scope 1 and 2 necessary, and 3 if relevant, even if scope 3 is becoming from time to time even more relevant, even more required by the investor community, although this is much costly for any issuer, which has to put serious resources on that. Secondly, they are asking to be rated, to be certified by a third-party advisor, confirming the correctness and completeness of the data. So we are seeing the request of a third-party assurance. And then we see some more typical targets, such as the lobbying activities and capital expenditure with company strategy that were already requested in last years and the previous years, even before that CGI Climate came to the main page of the journals. When we look at the CGI Climate from shareholder proposal, again, we go back to what I anticipated. The proposal is generally adversed by shareholders if it is aimed at adding burdensome requests, burdensome disclosure for the company. In such case, they are on the opposite, supported when the story, the governance history of the company is a failing one. So if there have been serious, significant violation, litigation, or controversy in the company, then it might be the case that the shareholder proposal is advanced for, say, on climate, and such proposal would be likely supported by the investors community in order to put clarity in a contested environment. Glass Lewis, on the opposite against ISS, is adopting an approach more direct. Glass Lewis is questioning directly if, and we will see it in its guidelines, if the CGI Climate is something to be discussed in a general meeting, or on the opposite and more opportune, if it is a matter of the board of directors. Setting the strategy is a matter of a board of directors. Climate strategy is a matter of strategy. Hence, the CGI Climate should stay in the boardroom. What shareholders should assess if the correctness of the method, the correctness of the path, to the extent that data are available and can be easily and effectively processed by investors community. Shareholders need a massive instrument, massive resources to analyze such big amount of data that any single company can put in a climate report. This way, asking for a shareholder support could be thrilling for many shareholders to face. Hence, Glass Lewis is quite not skeptical, but it pays a big attention to the scope of the request for consent and to the scope of the disclosure. On the shareholder proposal, on the opposite, the approach is more consistent with the one of ISS. So Glass Lewis is supporting proposal when the situation requires that, and so when controversies exist, when the disclosure is short on the company side, and so a stimulus from shareholder base is warmly welcome. As per the investor guidelines, we collected some statements from Legal & General, BlackRock, Amundi, which suggests companies to stick to the most recognized initiatives, in particular the net zero commitment that should be a precise and undisputable target for the companies. Investors are asking for the enlargement of the scope to the scope 3 emission when relevant, and this when relevant is becoming from time to time as even more an exception. So scope 3 will become an ordinary request from shareholders. And to provide reports that are consistent with a clear business strategy. Say on climate cannot exist without a clear commitment from the company on its climate target. With such introduction for the discussion, I would leave back the floor to Silvia for the introduction of the speakers.
Yeah. Thank you. No, that has been a good introduction. And we certainly see that it's an increasing effort, because there's double companies that have done it in 22 versus the previous year. But it's also a lot of requests from the shareholders and a lot of expectations. So it takes a huge amount of work to do a say on climate. So now let's hear from the companies that actually done it, their experience. I will start with Katia Riva, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer of Atlantia. Atlantia has been the only company in Italy that has gone through this way, so that they have submitted for the first time say on climate on the 2022 annual meeting. And Atlantia is an infrastructure and transportation really company that has a global presence across the world, mainly working on tolls, on railways, airport, and mobility services, with 6.4 billion of revenues. So it's quite a sizable player. Katia, can you share with us what has been the motivation for your company to go through this process, and what has been your experience through it?
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. I'm glad to share our recent experience, really, because as you said, Silvia, we went through this in the course of the 2022 annual general meeting. So a couple of things here to connect back to what I heard from Georgeson. First thing is to say that our say on climate proposal was coming from the board, okay, so it was not shareholder driven. And the second thing I want to say is that climate is an important, yet just one part of a broader ESG ambition, which is our, what we call the sustainability strategy, which in fact is very much embedded into the business strategy of the company. So why did we do that? For a very simple reason, as you said, we're active in the field of transport infrastructure, and in the field of services to people using transport infrastructure. So all in all, our exposure, the exposure of the portfolio of activities in our group to climate change is very high. So that's the basic reason why we care very much about this, right? With transport representing, depending on the source, but at least 16% of global worldwide emission, we are maybe the third or the fourth industry. So the ecosystem in transport is material, right, for decreasing CO2 emissions. So why we did that? Because the topic is very material, because beyond our own direct footprint, so the emission that we can, sort of control or influence more directly, our activity is very exposed. So the two underlying reasons is that, one, we need to preserve asset value over time, so that those assets will be in a position to continue to remunerate invested capital by shareholders in the long run. So let me make an example here, right? We have physical infrastructure subject to the potentially devastating effects of extreme weather events. So we need to care about that and understand, what to do to increase resilience. Okay, so on one side is mitigating risk, on the other side is grabbing opportunities. So we know that transport is gonna will have to, and it's already, by the way, going through a very significant transformation. So transport needs to go away from being powered by fossil fuel to being powered by something that we already know and technology is available at scale, which is electric vehicles, and something we get to know, which is maybe, hydrogen fuel planes, or maybe something different, or maybe new forms of mobility. So we can see that there are pockets of opportunities out of this transition. So these are the two, I would say, two reasons. The other important thing is that, we're part of an ecosystem, as many other organizations. I believe in our case, we own the transport infrastructure, but we're part of a much bigger ecosystem that goes from, people using, millions of people using our infrastructure across the world. Most of our business is regulated business. So grantors and regulators have got a big say in the way in which we generate value, as well as those people that, develop, manufactures the car, the trucks, the planes, etc., then ultimately uses our infrastructure. So this was very clear to us that we couldn't do this alone. So there was also a strong argument about, aligning the ecosystem. So create a platform for our ecosystem to, get together and do something. So enable them coalition building, climate advocacy, and other things which are needed to make it work. So I would say that's the reason.
So this process has been helpful for you, not just for the shareholders, but also for the stakeholder. I mean, what's the company has gained out of the process? Is more connection with the stakeholder, clearer targets? Or?
Yeah, well, I think, there are probably three key things that we took away from the experience. One very important thing is clarity, not only on targets, how to turn the pledge or the target, I'm going to be net zero in so many years, into actionable plan with attached capex and opex plan, and with attached an understanding of when the return of that capex is gonna get back to shareholders. So that's was a very important piece of our journey. So not only, I target to get there, but a clear explanation, and as you said, is a very significant effort, at least it was in our case, not really doing the same climate, but building the plan, building a credible plan. How am I going to go there? What do I need in terms of capital resources and other resources, because it's a stakeholder type of issue, really. It's not that we can do this alone. So that's very basic, but very, very important, transformative thing for us, because this triggered an overall integration of the notion of this topic into the key value creation processes of the company, from governance to capital allocation to risk management to lobbying activities, etc., etc. So it was a great, platform to trigger quickly alignment. And I think I talk about the ecosystem already, so it's very much shareholders, not only.
Thank you. That's been a great review. And Valentin, let me come to you. You are also the Chief Sustainability Officer of a transportation and infrastructure company. So similar industries is also toll road, construction, airport, energy infrastructure, and mobility. So the same type of companies with 6.8 billion of revenues in 2021, and a large presence in North America, in Canada and the US. So where actually the say on climate is a lot of visibility. So I wonder from your point of view, with your well-established position and your continuous discussions with engagement with the shareholders, why did you run the risk to expose yourself to this process, rather than a normal shareholders engagement?
Well, first, can you hear me well? Okay, yeah. So first, thank you very much for inviting me to take part in this event. And yes, you're absolutely right. Exposing even exposing myself as a manager, you know, to the shareholders. This is something that sometimes is a little bit scary, you know, when you're thinking of or thinking about doing so. But at the end of the day, it's been really very positive, as Katia said earlier. I think it's in general a very positive experience. And even when obviously you had to make much more work, particularly around the, if you want, bureaucracy behind those AGMs and so on. No? But I think that that's a very positive experience anyway. And thank you for introducing Ferrovial too. Yes, we are in similar sectors to Atlantia, mobility, transport infrastructures. We are also general contractors in that sense. And we were disclosing our carbon reduction roadmap and our climate strategy since 2012, including scope 1, 2, and scope 3. I suppose you're all familiar with those scopes and this and these words. And we had a first period of reduction of emissions from 2009-2020. We reduced around 60% our carbon intensity in our portfolio in this decade. So we've been performing very well, and we were very used to disclose this kind of information. So part of the work was done before making the decision. We were the first company here in Spain bringing this roadmap and the climate strategy to the AGM in 2021, as you may know. This being 2022, our second time bringing this to the annual general meeting. The reasons, you asked me about the reasons. The most relevant point is that, as Katia pointed out before, the climate change is recognized as a systemic risk on a global basis. We are global companies, and every single sector, everywhere worldwide, is impacted positively or negatively on the climate change issues. So it's something absolutely relevant. And it's particularly relevant in our sector because you have, on one hand, eventually transition and physical risks, but also new business opportunities. For example, Ferrovial is now jumping in the renewable sector, most of all because we are very focused on our climate strategy. So it's a consequence of our climate strategy, and it's a consequence of understanding our risks, but also our opportunities. So what is clear for us is that this is a very relevant piece of the core business of our company. And having said that, it's natural to share these initiatives, our climate strategy, our roadmap to reduce the carbon intensity of our portfolio, to share this with our shareholders and to share this with the proxy advisors, in general, the ESG and investors community. So it's clear that this is something absolutely critical for our company, and so we should share this, our management of this risk and opportunities with the shareholders. As a consequence of this, because we've been reporting this and disclosing this publicly, but reporting this to the board of directors from 2012 to from the very beginning of our roadmap, you know. So the board of directors made the decision of bringing this in 2021 to the annual general meeting, and with a very strong focus on the way we are gonna decarbonize our portfolio, because in our view, or in general, a very carbon intensive portfolio is a long-term risk for virtually every single sector of activity. These are the reasons, the main reasons. But it's, as Katia pointed out before too, there are, looking at the feedback from the shareholders, there are, in my experience, it's been really positive, but not just as Ferrovial, in my case, particularly as a manager of those things, of the climate change strategy of earlier. Why? First, because it was very curious, because I remember when we started the roadshow before the AGM, with investors, proxy advisors, and so on. Someone from our general secretary told me, well, I suppose a couple of investors or proxy advisors could be interested in sharing or in talking about this item of the agenda. So be ready, just in case you have to share with them some info. It was absolutely surprising that virtually 100% of the players were willing to talk about the climate change, the item of the climate change agenda. And 50% were willing to talk just about the climate change, the item of the climate change agenda. So really, it was very impressively, very, very important for them too. And in terms of feedback, it's been really very positive, most of all because this is a way to understand much better the expectations of the ESG community and our shareholders. And this is a very relevant way to anticipate our trends and to address those expectations before. In that sense, for example, just to finish, in that sense, we've been really very positive in terms of, for example, the transition from carbon neutrality to the net zero. We have a commitment on carbon neutrality by 2050, but we are gonna disclose, and we are gonna make public very shortly our transition to net zero. And this is a consequence of these conversations with our shareholders. As well, for example, to point out the level of ambition of our strategy, or to take into account also the positive feedback in terms of ambition around our commitment with Science Targets initiative. All those things have been really very relevant, not just for the company, not just for sharing with the shareholders our roadmap and the way we are going to address this huge challenge, but mainly to myself as a manager. Thank you.
So you really learned through the process, and your inputs that you received from the shareholders help you in setting the strategy and communicate it in clearly and maybe
much better than hiring a consultant.
Yeah. I'm sure you got some help as well. So maybe Andreas Borg, you are from a very sensitive industry. The oil and gas industry has been on the spot on climate for a long time. So I think, and you are also very, very large and very well-known company globally. So what has been the perspective of Shell? What brought you to this decision, and any lessons learned? Also, maybe what would you advise to board members in pursuing this process?
Yeah, thank you, and good afternoon, Sylvia. Some good questions. So the reason we introduced a Say on Climate vote in the annual general meeting in 2021, so roughly 18 months ago, and was actually two things. First, we had a shareholder resolution on climate that got increasingly support from shareholders. So we recognized that our shareholders had a real dilemma. They could either support a resolution on climate, or they could support the company. And if they supported the company, they would get negative coverage from NGOs, from media, and from other stakeholders, including the beneficial owners. So we wanted to solve that dilemma by introducing an opportunity for our shareholders to support both climate and the company. And we did that by introducing our own Say on Climate resolution for the AGM. Now, secondly, I recognize what Katja and Valentin was talking about, because secondly, we were interested in a more detailed dialogue with our shareholders around energy transition and both the associated risk, but also the associated opportunities in relation thereto. Now, 18 months ago, the climate dialogue and discussion was almost entirely focused on supply of energy. So we had tried to get a message across that if you cut supply of existing energy resources without changing how we use energy, then it leads to energy shortages, it leads to price spikes, inflation, recession, strikes, and disorder in society. And when we said that 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, people will disregard it as greenwashing. And it's actually only in the last 8 months that there's a real recognition of that message. So we would very much like to have the opportunity to discuss that in details with shareholders. Now, what did we learn? I would mention 3 things to you. So first time around in 2021, we saw that 20% of our shareholders, so 1 out of 5, supported both resolutions on climate. So clearly had the view that if it's climate, it must be good, we support. Our view is that it's 2 completely different strategies. Our strategy and the shareholder resolution that the board did not support. And second time around, we managed to see that, you know, people did not support both resolutions. So that was the first learning. The second learning is back to the Georgeson presentation. We learned that it's important for the proxy agencies, and especially for Glass Lewis, that you do not take the accountability away from the board by introducing a say on climate. So in your wording, you need to be very clear that the accountability for the strategy stays with the board. And if you don't do that, you have the risk of not getting support from especially Glass Lewis. Now, they were kind enough to tell us that before and not after. So we factored that in, but I think it's an important learning. And thirdly, our cadence is that we have a strategic update every 3 years, and then we have a progress update every year. And the progress update we introduced this year, and what we saw was that people that voted against our resolution referred back to the strategy. So we haven't quite solved and made it very clear what we are voting on every 3rd year. It's about the strategy. Every year there will be an opportunity to give, and as a shareholder, a view on whether we have made progress enough in the last year, yes and no. So that one we still have to work on, and we will try to address that in the next AGM.
Yeah.
So then secondly, the advice to the board or a board member, I think it needs to be recognized that this is a lot of work for the board. It's a lot of work for the executive committee management, and it's a lot of work for the organization. So I think there needs to be a really good reason for introducing a say on climate. And I think both what Katja told and what Valentine told, and hopefully what I have shared, is 3 good examples where you think there's a real reason why you need to do this. This can be in terms of a shareholder resolution that the board would like to match on energy transition because they don't agree with the shareholder resolution. That was our case. It can be because there's a need for sharing risk and opportunities. That's what Katja and Valentine showed. It can be because there's a trust issue that requires further dialogue from a board perspective. It could be because there is a need or a wish to promote the brand, to mention some examples of what do I mean, but there need to be a real good reason for doing this, because it's not easy. There's a lot of work associated with it.
Yeah.
So that would be my answers. Back to you.
Thank you. That's
Thank
really
you.
very helpful. Thanks for your insight. Andrew, let me come to you. What's your perspective? I mean, you are Vanguard, so it's a major shareholder, a major investor in all these companies. And we heard a lot of different views on the importance of the say of climate. So what's your perspective and what was your reaction about what you heard?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Sylvia. There's a bit of feedback on the line. Is that okay? No. Okay.
I think it's okay. I'll...
Okay, that sounds better. Thank you. Well, indeed, it's a very interesting panel and a very interesting question. Thank you. I can definitely build on some of the perspectives that Andreas has just shared. First and foremost, I just want to clarify Vanguard's position here, because Vanguard, of course, recognizes that climate is a material risk for many of our portfolio companies and a systemic risk. However, we do not take a prescriptive view of what boards must include in climate transition plans, nor do we take a prescriptive view on what approach companies should take to managing climate risk. Importantly, Vanguard is actually not asking companies to hold a say on climate vote. So we are not asking or advocating for more say on climate votes. But as we heard from the other panelists today, we recognize that some companies have actually found value in holding a vote. And that value might vary based on a company's industry or the circumstances that are unique to a company, as Andreas has just very astutely outlined, I would say. So we do see that there could be value there for some companies. And I think what we would just ask when a company does decide to hold a say on climate vote is that the board provides very clear disclosure of the rationale for the vote, so those unique circumstances that apply, that they articulate the oversight mechanisms and the implications of the vote. So as we just heard, we would like to see that the board is very clear that they retain the responsibility for overseeing the implementation of the strategy. And finally, to produce robust and thorough reporting in line with the TCFD framework. It's a very basic kind of ask when proposing a say on climate a vote. So those are kind of the basic asks and our view on say on climate, and whether companies should hold a vote. I might just clarify a little bit more on Vanguard's positioning and kind of why we positioned ourselves that way. One of the key reasons why we're are asking boards to think about articulating oversight mechanisms and the implications for a vote is that Vanguard does not seek to direct company strategy under any circumstances based on our investment strategy and our role in monitoring portfolio companies. So we believe that company strategy, which includes obviously climate transition strategy, rests firmly with the board. So when we are evaluating a say on climate vote, we will evaluate it based on how it signals coherence in the reporting and disclosures that are provided by a company on its climate transition plan, rather than endorsing the plan itself. So our analysis always will remain firmly grounded in assessing long-term risk governance, which means that we look for boards to oversee climate risk and opportunity, implement strategies to manage and mitigate risks or seize opportunities, and provide robust disclosure using TCFD or investor-oriented reporting frameworks. So to that end, we would ask that boards who are considering holding a say on climate vote take that positioning into account and make it very clear and explicit that the vote that's being offered is actually on the climate transition plan report, or the reporting that's available to explain the strategy, and to be very clear that the board retains overall discretion for a company's strategy, including, of course, managing climate risk. I think we are a bit concerned that there might be some unintended consequences for accountability when a board asks shareholders to actually sign off on the strategy itself, and therefore would really prefer that the vote is very clearly focused on the reporting. I think, and what we've heard a little bit from Andreas as well, is that we're aware that boards might sometimes receive mixed signals given different investor positioning and motivations, and recognizing that it's quite impossible for all shareholders to holistically evaluate and sign off on a corporate strategy, given the vast implications of that and the fact that that should rest with the board. Again, we would really firmly advocate for a vote on the reporting to help guide that conversation and the vote for investors.
Thank you. That has been very, very clear message. I'm actually keen to hear from Sabrina what her thoughts are, because we heard a lot about accountability of the board. Sabrina is in the governing board of the Climate Governance Initiative, but she is also a non-executive director, and she is also a professor in law and in private comparative law. So she can bring the overall perspective and help us closing the discussion on what really board should be thinking about.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for this interesting conversation. So let's have a look from a legal viewpoint. I agree with what has been said so far. First question to pose from a legal viewpoint is it legitimate for a board to involve shareholders on the decisions referring to climate strategy, climate targets? Well, the question has been dealt with years ago with reference to business decisions in general, managerial decisions in general. And there are some legal authors in Germany, but also in Italy, that actually argue that it is not legitimate for boards to involve shareholders in such decisions, because, as you said, management belongs exclusively to boards of directors. So there is no way boards could involve shareholders to share with them business decisions. However, there are other legal authors, and I am among the latter. I wrote a book years ago on the role of general meeting in corporate governance in general, so not with reference to climate strategy, because this book was written in 2012, so there was no climate issue at that moment. However, other legal authors, and as I said, I am among them, believe that actually it is possible to involve shareholders in business decisions, managerial decisions, because directors can hear views from everybody, from all stakeholders, from consultants, from anybody they want. One of the duties is to take decisions being informed. So one of the duties is to gather all possible information. So why not allowing them to involve shareholders on climate strategy, climate targets? It's a way of hearing their views, hearing the views of shareholders, and we shall not forget that directors are fiduciaries to shareholders. They shall pursue shareholders' interest. So why, prohibiting them from understanding what shareholders think about a certain climate strategy, or more in general, about a certain business decision. However, first of all, the resolution is a non-binding resolution. As we say, it's just a say on climate. We have other examples in our jurisdictions, such as a say on remuneration, which became binding just after years. So first of all, it is a non-binding resolution. It is just an advisory vote, an advisory resolution, and directors are free to follow shareholders vote or not. But more importantly, but you said so already, it is important to stress that accountability, responsibility, liability for management decisions and climate strategy in particular is only upon the board of directors. So there is no way to escape liability, even liability, after, a shareholder vote. It's not an excuse that shareholders voted in favor or not in favor of a certain climate strategy. What does this mean? It means that in case shareholders vote in support of a certain climate strategy, and later on this strategy reveals to be wrong, only boards are responsible for the choice they made. Only boards are liable if there is any damage to the company for the choice they made. More importantly, even more importantly, if shareholders do not agree with the proposed climate strategy, with the proposed climate target, this does not mean that boards can say they don't have to follow a climate strategy, a climate target. So it's not, again, an excuse arguing that shareholders do not support a certain climate strategy, because again, management belongs only to directors. Only directors are liable. And in particular, and we all know, you said also that climate change is a financial risk that shall be taken into consideration when setting the strategy, when thinking whether the business model is resilient to the climate challenge or not. In particular, in Europe, we have quite strict duties with reference to climate change for directors, starting from disclosure in non-financial reporting of risks and opportunities, following the recommendations issued by the TCFD. This is a specific duty for directors in European large companies, which will be extended to even a larger number of companies in Europe. But disclosure is not the end of the duty. If companies disclose climate-related risks and opportunities, it is the duty of directors to manage those risks and exploiting those opportunities by embedding them in the strategy. So again, who cares that shareholders voted no with reference to a certain strategy? It is the duty of directors to consider climate change, to adapt the business model to climate change challenges. And this will be even more true if the proposal directive on sustainable due diligence will be approved. At that point, a special duty for directors to align to the Paris Agreement targets will be introduced. But even if this duty will not be introduced, if there are risks and opportunities to be managed and exploited, it is upon directors doing that. Otherwise, they might be liable if they cause damages to the company, and damages can be stranded assets, false disclosure in case these risks and opportunities are not disclosed enough, lack of opportunities which will cause damages to the business, and so potential litigation from stakeholders who are damaged by wrong decisions. Thank you. Silvia, we don't hear you.
Sorry. No, I heard a lot of things from you, and basically what I'm getting is that the board members actually have a lot of instruments to use. There's a lot of disclosure that they have to do, and they better do well. So there are increasingly expectations to very clear disclosure and more scientific measurement of targets. And on the other hand, there is the traditional engagement with shareholders, which is something that happens anyway, but the accountability of everything remains with the board. So the important thing for board member is the development of a strategy that is fully embedded with all the climate-related changes. And Say on Climate is an additional instrument that may put some of these elements together, but it's more a communication tool as opposed to anything else. That's what I'm getting from everybody's comments. It seems that from the comments from our speakers is that there is something that is left to the company because it imposed the process of putting it together, probably impose a discipline that in itself remains with the company. But as a matter of fact, it's a discipline that the board should have anyway. But I wonder, what's your view on the trends that we are seeing? Now that we are getting closer to 2030 targets and 2030 deadlines, and then we'll have 2050, do we see more pressure on companies? And maybe this is a question also for Andrew. Or do you think that there will be more Say on Climate next year, and we'll see this as an increasing trend based on everything? I want to see both Andrew and Sabrina point of view on this. Is this a trend coming up now?
Sure, I'm happy to comment on that. I do think it is a trend, and it does look like there is continued momentum for Say on Climate votes, at least in Europe, and it looks like also in Australia. Again, we're not calling for those, but we know that some other investors are actively advocating for those, and we hear from companies that they're considering them. And it does seem to be something that comes up again and again in the regulatory agenda as well, for regulators to consider a Say on Climate framework. So I think there's a kind of clear direction of travel. I mean, for us, I think the key point is that, Vanguard's investment stewardship team has been engaging on climate and other material risks for a number of years, and Say on Climate certainly doesn't determine whether or not we engage on climate. So, we are always advocating for enhanced disclosure and oversight of material risks, including climate, at portfolio companies where it's relevant, and remain firmly grounded in a materiality-based risk assessment for taking in that, which helps us to take a case-by-case approach on votes when they come up. I do think that you'll see a lot of other investors also continue to actively engage on climate, especially with the impending deadlines, as you've mentioned, as we get closer to 2030 and 2050, regardless of whether Say on Climate is actually offered as a specific vote. So I think that's clear direction of travel, but I also think that you're going to see that engagement happening no matter what. And I can certainly say from Vanguard's perspective that we'll be engaging with companies where we find material risk, regardless of whether there's a vote.
Thank you. Any final thoughts, Sabrina?
Yes, I may add something. I mean, I believe Say on Climate makes much more sense in the US because there is not strict legislation, none on directors nor on investors, but it doesn't make much sense in Europe because we have strict duties on directors, but also duties in terms of engagement on investors, institutional investors and the managers, so since a few years ago, because they are encouraged to engage on sustainability issues and of course climate change also.
Thank you. So I will close this fascinating discussion saying that, you know, in any case, board of directors needs to be fully engaged on climate and needs to be, you know, literature about it. So need to be very aware and need to be engaged in the discussion at the strategy level with the management team and the executive team about you know, the climate strategy, which is so difficult these days, everything that is going on. So I appreciate the insight from everybody. There's more to talk, definitely. So we will stay on the topic and we'll get engaged with all of you in the future. So thank you a lot for your comments and your insight for this participation to this meeting.
Grazie, thank you.
Yeah.